Oh, there's that article by the Ollie Taylor. Oh, come on. No. Okay. Let's see. This whitewashing of history can also be seen in the pamphlet that was issued for the statue's unveiling. The only mention of slavery within it relates to Carteret rescuing 270 Englishmen from the slave trade when he was 27. It goes on to describe the statue as portraying Carteret in an imposing, thoughtful, yet approving mood, as if he is aware that his statue is the catalyst for a rekindling of lost friendships between Jersey and New Jersey. Carteret has also been described as a hero, Jersey's greatest son, one of Jersey's great figures, and a role model for youngsters, highlighting just how much of a positive figure he has been portrayed as. So, what aspect of history has been erased? That he was one of the founding 6 committee members of the Company of Royal Adventures into Africa, set up in 1660 to trade in gold, ivory, and slaves, which apparently was also a family affair, with his son James collecting over 300 slaves from Africa for transportation to the West Indies during one of the company's early voyages in 1663. The company was succeeded 9 years later and was the template for the Royal African Company, of whom Carteret was a consultant and early minor investor. The Royal African Company went on to ship more African slaves to the Americas than any other institution in the history of the Atlantic slave trade. Between 1680 and 1688, it transported approximately 5,000 slaves a year, totaling around 212,000 between 1662 and 1731. It's estimated that the 44,000 men, women, and children died en route, with thousands of those who did survive arriving in the New World with the company's initials branded on their chests. As I wrote previously, Carteret also enacted the concession and agreement in 1664 that offered additional land per slave for any settler arriving in New Jersey to encourage population growth for his newly gifted American state. This led to New Jersey having one of the highest slave populations, holding captive more than 2/3 of all enslaved black in the North, leading to it being labeled as the slave state of the North. His contribution to the historical record of the transatlantic slave trade is clearly significant, and not just in local terms either. Many have argued that we cannot judge the past by today's moral standards. Pause. If I had a penny for every time people tell me that we cannot judge the past by today's moral standards, I would be rich. I would be rich AF. I'd be so rich. That's like the number one thing that I hear when I've always had a little these little joys at finding and exposing unfavorable facts about beloved historical figures. And every time I've done it, that's one of the first response that I get out of most people, especially other people who dig history. We can't judge the past by today's moral standards. Uh, and you know, my argument back to that is my argument back to that is that we can judge them by these moral standards, even though it's the past, because at the time when this was actually more normal to society, owning slaves, right? At that time, there were already abolitionists, if I said that word right. So, like, obviously, it was a moral issue then, too, if you had people who were willing to and who did resort to violence and war to get that message across that slavery was wrong and that, all human beings are equally human beings. So, I think that's a poor ass argument, if we're being frank. And this person says, which to an extent I don't disagree with. Suck it, nerds. However, 4 Quakers and Mennonites in Pennsylvania signed a petition as early as 1688 against the traffic of men body, marking the beginning of the anti-slavery movement among people of European descent. To think that no one had issues with slavery before that petition is clearly a reflection of the denial and a lack of the honesty which still exists about this period of history. So he just proved a point there, the same point that I just said a little while ago. Quakers weren't so violent in their, after conversion. Most of them weren't violent folks and didn't really resort in violence. And they definitely didn't jive with slavery. They were not cool with that shit at all. But that's something that gets thrown around a lot. And by the end of this book that we're like digging through, we will all see that although Quakers did not believe in slavery, they were still very, very, very much racist. Former St. Peter Constable John Refault, who has not responded to my 2017 email about Carteret's past and by his own admission in the pamphlet I mentioned earlier says he was not aware of the man's history prior to 2013, has tried to redirect the debate to one about modern day slavery, stating, "Don't get angry about the past is the past. Tearing things down isn't going to make that better, but actually if we focus on modern slavery." Yeah, here's a good point here. It is not that Mr. Refault wanted to promote a slave trader or is himself a racist, but he certainly appears to be surprisingly ignorant of his past, considering his historical research prior to the statue's unveiling. What's clear is that both the former and current Constable of St. Peter are now fully aware of it, yet are still failing to appropriately address the issue. This is about setting the historical record straight, acknowledging the wrongs that have been done in order to move forward for the betterment of society. I have a couple thoughts with this. Forgive me if you don't agree. First note, this is what the problem really is with most people. And most people who give that you can't judge the past by today's moral standards, blah, 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 blah. Here's the real bottom line, like you said right here. Like, these people aren't promoting slave trade, or these people aren't necessarily racist. They're ignorant. They're ignorant of the past. They're ignorant of the history associated with some of these things. And instead of just having a moment of humility, healthy humility, and just taking accountability and just saying I didn't know and addressing that, you get all this other nonsense. Like people, I guess really people would just, I don't know. That's the note about that. It is really not that people mean anything bad. Um, and I can't speak for everything. I'm just, maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but like he said here, like that's what I assume in most people. Like they're not racist or they don't want to promote those like evil parts of history. They're just ignorant. They just don't know. They just don't know, honestly. That's really what it boils down to, in my opinion. Um, and like I never really took a stance on um taking down statues or defacing statues or not having statues that like represent like not so nice characters of the past. Um to me really it doesn't really matter either way. And I think a lot of things in life like we have choices on, and I will admit that this may be very easy for me to say, um, considering my skin color and the relation that has with my experience in this life. Um, it doesn't really bother me if they're up or not. Um, let's say that they're left up. Um, like let's just can we take it as like a isolated incident, like each one of its own? Like if we take the Carteret statue, I'm not bothered if they leave it up, but I also don't and won't look at it as a memorial of someone great. I'll always use it for the opportunity to shine light on the parts of history that need to be talked about. And I think that that's like a good thing. If it's always there, you can always point to something and say, here's an example of like an example of whitewashing history, which there's thousands of examples. But now you have, even with this article, you have something to point to and say, this is an example of A, B, and C. I don't know. Maybe that's just how I see it. But the fact that it got defaced doesn't upset me. If they took it down or I found out that they took it down, that wouldn't upset me either, honestly. But then like we get into other situations, right? We get into other situations where like I forgive me, I really don't even remember his name. He was a piece of shit anyway. I know he was used as the character in Forrest Gump. Uh, something Forrest or Forrest something. Anyway, he had a lot to do with the KKK and a lot of schools and places in the South and in the Bible Belt were named after him. Yeah, let's rename that shit. I'm all for renaming that shit. Like, we ain't giving that type of... It ain't JFK where we're naming everything after him. Like, nah, I'm not for all that. I'm not for that at all. I don't know. Isolated incidents. Isolated situations, I guess.